Good afternoon, everyone. My name's Tom Shave. I'm a partner at Evelyn Partners, and I run our FinTech practice. Delighted this afternoon to invite my colleagues onto the stage to talk through our SWOT analysis of the FinTech sector. Don't worry, we're not breaking out the flip charts just yet, but we will try and rapidly go through a full SWOT analysis. We've got a lot to cover, so bear with us as we make as much progress as we can. So I'll just introduce my colleagues quickly. You've just heard from Louis, Barney, Angelina, Adam, and Maha. Great panel we've got today. So we're going to start with strengths. And I think it's been a really interesting time for the FinTech sector over the past 12 months. One of the things that we've seen is quite a varied economic environment and quite an evolution in the funding space. And I wanted to turn to you first, Angelina, and reflect on some of the strengths of the UK sector, FinTech sector, particularly over the last 12 months and how it compares.
Absolutely. Well, it's hard to argue that the volumes of funding has been reduced, especially in the last 2 quarters of 2022. However, it's all relative. If we compare into 21, there have been a reduction. But if we compare it to the prior year, 2020, or compare it to the rest of Europe, for example, UK FinTech funding remains strong, particularly across early stage funding, which is fantastic news for the industry. We've also seen some mega rounds still there, and we've also seen some hidden levels of funding going into the market, which are internal rounds, which sometimes not get reported, which means essentially that the industry remains funded and supported by the VC community.
Louis, do you have any reflections on the funding environment in the UK?
Well, look, it's more challenging than it was, but I think it is still a strength of the UK FinTech market. I mean, the quantum of money going into the UK FinTech industry is, I think, second only to the US. So look, we can beat ourselves up about how it's not as good as it was, but I think on a relative basis, it still remains a very attractive place to raise financing and to grow a business. But could do better, for sure, but still remains a strength.
And Adam, from a Revolut perspective, what's your views?
Yeah, so I think there's 2 takeaways for us. I mean, one, the UK is still probably one of the best places to start and grow a FinTech anywhere in the world. And these funding rounds, relatively, the UK is still performing well. I think the second thing is we shouldn't see just that slightly more difficult fundraising environment necessarily as a bad thing. You know, we've had a number of years of pretty easy money going into the industry, having an ability to now differentiate between strong businesses that are sustainable, profitable in the future versus maybe businesses which needed a little bit more pressure testing, we think is actually probably a good thing in the medium term, not just for the UK, but FinTech globally.
Maha, I'd like to turn now to the regulatory environment and get your perspectives on how you think that plays into the strengths of the UK sector.
Yeah, so, I mean, I'd like to think that we can say the UK is a strong regulatory environment, and that has to be a strength. You know, if we've got an environment where there is market integrity, there is consumer confidence, there'll be investor confidence, that has to be, you know, good for everybody. And so, you know, kind of maintaining the high standards that we set for industry players, for regulated entities, you know, we'd like to continue to do that. And there's a number of initiatives that you know, we've launched to indeed sort of support that you know, that approach. I could talk a little bit more about that, but you know, supporting innovation from a regulatory perspective, and you've all heard of our sandbox and different sort of initiative for innovative firms. Really, the key for innovation is that it goes into scale. So we're talking a lot about scaling firms, but starting from a really strong base where you are scaling with kind of strength and stability and resilience is really what we want to see for innovative firms scaling and the role that we want to play.
Adam, I know Revolut have also benefited from some of the regulatory environment, open banking and stuff. I don't know whether you had anything to add.
Yeah, I think regulation has clearly been a massive strength for the UK, particularly over the last decade. I mean, particularly FCA, other regulators, they led the way globally on things like open banking, on things like the sandbox. You know, we work with dozens of regulators around the world. A lot of them are trying to copy-paste, right, what the UK did a few years ago. I think, though, we've got to recognize that was a historic strength. How do we keep it a strength in the future is now kind of the challenge, which is we see a lot of regulators and other jurisdictions accelerating some of their reforms, things like digital identity, moving fast on open finance. I think in the UK, we're clearly catching up, including great announcements, even just this morning from Andrew Griffiths, CFID, and others. But I think that's really got to be our focus post-Brexit. How do we take that excellent strength that helped Revolut and other companies start here in the UK, and how do we help the next wave of fintech by continuing to move quickly on that fintech regulatory agenda?
So if we sort of evolve the conversation now into weaknesses, Barney, it'd be great to bring you in and get your perspectives on law and certainty of law, and what your views are on the regulatory environment as well.
Well, legal certainty as to what the products are and so on is pretty strong. I think further case law will provide much needed final clarity on some nuances. But generally speaking, the system is very strong, and we're not having, for instance, the debates that we're getting in the US about whether something is a security or a commodity or whatever, to anything like the same degree. Regulatory certainty, I mean, at the moment, there's not that much regulation on digital and crypto. What there is fine. Obviously, there's going to be a new regime that's being crafted that's going to be an evolution from the traditional finance assets towards, applying the same things to digital with a new crypto definition. And I think that's being very thoughtfully done. And the trick here, which I think we will generally get right, so I'm optimistic about it, but it's a threat, is to make sure that the concepts are intuitive and it's clear when they apply and when they don't. So they don't need a legal opinion for every thing that you issue, which is not the case, for instance, with MiCA, which is premised on whether something is an e-money token or an asset reference token or whatever, which introduces all sorts of new conceptual distinctions and lawyers and so on for things that you shouldn't need. So, and then finally, we do need to keep up. All I'd say, though, is the key thing is to get it right. I mean, the clients that we have from around the world at Shearman are waiting to see what the UK does. They put their plans for the continent and many other places in the world on hold, waiting to see what the UK does. And I think, every indication is if the UK does what I think it's going to do, they're going to go long on the UK system. So I think the main thing is to get it right. There obviously is a stampede that's going on around the world. But a lot of those stampedes are from countries which don't really have any supervisors. So remember, there are two parts of the regulatory regime. There's the regulatory rules, and there's the supervision element. And on the supervision element, we've got one of the only two credible systems, in my view, in the world, the other being in the US.
Yeah. And Maha, just bringing you back in on the regulatory side, with the view that the UK regulatory environment has been strong historically. What's your view going forward from a regulatory environment point of view?
Well, we can't sit on our laurels because the world is moving really fast. The world is more digital than ever, and that will continue to be the case. There's a lot of innovation, whether it's crypto assets, DLT, AI. I mean, you would have heard a lot about AI today. So making sure that we are constantly, as a regulator, learning, which we try to through tech sprints and things like that, but learning and trying to stay, not necessarily being reactive and responsive, trying to stay at least current or ahead of what's happening is a real challenge that we need to think about. And I think it's certainly a challenge for us. It's a challenge for all regulators around the world, and not sitting on our laurels is going to be a key challenge for us that we need to contend with.
And how can the industry help you with that?
Well, the engagement that we have with industry is really key. We were just having a debate in the green room about disagreeing on various things, and that disagreement is really important. I think it's very easy to have a one point of view, but getting the industry together via different forums to think about what the right outcome would be is the key. And I think everybody will agree with consumer protection and market integrity as some of the objectives that we want to achieve. It's how do we get there? We don't have all the answers. It does need to be a collaboration.
One of the other areas we talked about off stage was around data protection and the whole environment around that, and whether there's a weakness in the UK and European environment and opportunities there. And Barney, thoughts on that?
I think it's a problem. I mean, there are no massive big data businesses in Europe, and I think GDPR is the reason for that, the principal reason for that. And now we're out of the EU scheme, we should be doing something far more radical to GDPR than what's going on with the government at the moment. And unfortunately, it can't be left to one side and treated as a different topic. It's intrinsic to financial regulation because data usage is so intrinsic to many fintechs and crypto and digital businesses. So I just hope that we move forward more imaginatively and get on with that. because you can still protect consumers' data, but in a far more intuitive way that doesn't involve these endless legal arguments over whether someone's a processor or a controller, and whether your use of the data has expired and you now need to destroy it, or whether someone can reverse engineer from the data what an individual's particular data are, and so on. And those debates, unfortunately, lead to paralysis in business.
Adam, would you agree with that?
Yeah, just to build on Barney's point, I think that example of data being not really core necessarily to financial service regulation, but being clearly core to every area of financial service going forward, actually is replicated in many areas, whether it's, again, identity, whether it's AI regulation. I think one of the challenges we're going to have in the UK is I think actually the regulators are going to keep doing a fantastic job of overseeing and regulating financial services, but the challenge is going to be on the government about who is setting the tone on these new technologies. Is it, again, Treasury? Is it DCIT, the new Science and Technology Ministry? Is it actually sat somewhere between them or other ministries? And I think in the UK, what we really need to find is a coordinated, focused approach to driving forward technology and financial services regulation in tandem. And that's certainly something we're starting to see in other jurisdictions. The UK is going to need to try and keep up with.
Great, thanks. So moving on now to opportunities, really interested to explore what can the UK fintech industry do for the wider economy, and is there things that they can really help drive growth? Louis, it'd be great to hear from you on that.
Thanks very much. Well, look, a couple of things. The first thing to say is I slightly disconcertingly spied Tim Sykes in the audience here. It took me back 15 years ago to when we were at Standard Chartered together, and I think back to the massively clerical and administrative processes that we were kind of subject to. And I look at the fintech businesses that the business bank has invested in today and how it has taken away so much of that. So the productivity gain, not within the financial services industry, is huge, but also the productivity gains for businesses in being able to open accounts quicker, but link accounts into financial reporting, into climate-related reporting, all of those things. So I think the productivity opportunity for the economy as a whole, for the financial services sector, is huge. And just mentioning net zero, I think that that is an area where fintech, with its ability to manage data, to create reporting mechanisms that are intuitively easy to use and easier to populate, and can actually, scrape data in a way that informs companies about their emissions. All of this is just a huge opportunity in helping us to green the economy, and I think that that's a really exciting.
Well, and then you think about things like FinTech for good and social mobility and all of those other areas that FinTech can really help, and it feels really positive around where the FinTech industry might help us, the wider UK economy. One of the things that is often said about the UK fintechs and tech more generally is that how do UK fintechs really scale? Do they have the ambition to really scale to the heights that you see in other jurisdictions, particularly in the US? And it would be really interesting just to explore what some of the opportunities might be around that, and particularly funding potentially. Angelina, it would be great to bring you in on that point and just get your perspectives on.
Sure. One of the challenges, a key challenge for fintech scaling further and growing and not selling off too soon to a strategic buy, for example, is the funding. There's certain phases of growth that all businesses go through, and some phases are harder to raise capital at. And despite UK ecosystem being strong with VCs, strategic corporate venture vehicles, and high net worth individuals being present on the scene, we're nowhere near as close to what, for example, US investment ecosystem has to offer. And that often is quite a strong barrier to businesses scaling further. So anything that could open up more investment into the sector, open up even more opportunities for businesses to draw fundings from, would be very positive and allow them to run further, longer, and get bigger.
I mean, one of the things that's really interesting is some of the initiatives at the moment to really explore whether we can use pension funds to open up in further investment, other investment channels. Louis, any thoughts on?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, the gilts crisis back in October highlighted the paucity of risk assets in a lot of particularly defined contribution pension schemes. It's not that they should be skewed entirely to risk assets, but an allocation kind of makes some element of sense. And certainly the business bank's purpose is to put a small slice of tangible government support into an opportunity, not to control it, but to magnetize money from the private sector in alongside government and to try and encourage more UK institutional investment into earlier stage companies, scale-up companies that help them to stay in the UK economy for longer. So you know, I think there is huge opportunity in the UK for more institutional money to be coming into an innovative sector like FinTech. But we've got to kind of get the risk appetite right.
Yeah. And funding, I guess, is only just one aspect of scaling. There's a load of other aspects, such as talent and customers. Adam, it'd be really interesting to bring you in as working at a FinTech that has managed to scale globally, to get your perspective on customer acquisition and that side of things of scaling.
Yeah, it's a great question. And yeah, ambition is not something we lack at Revolut. I think, you know, in 7 years, we're now in, 39 countries, I think, globally. I think we're at 28 million customers. Hopefully I'm getting that number exactly right. Changes quite often. And I think our challenge, right, and it's a challenge for the UK, is really, when you're at FinTech, where do you choose to scale up from? And I think before Brexit, the UK was a great place, right? Because you had fantastic regulation, you had great talent, and you got, you know, 300, 400 million customers you could directly access. That's not the case anymore. And I think post-Brexit, we're still finding our way as the UK about why it's still the best place to start and scale a global champion, which is what the Chancellor wants, and I think what a lot of us in the country want, because we're going to get the benefits. I think one thing that we probably need to double down on in the UK is really finding a way to get better regulatory access to third countries. A really good example recently, Israel said if you have a regulated payments license from the UK, from the EU or the US, come and do business in our country, bring competition, bring innovation, and you don't need a local license. That's really exciting for the Israeli economy, and it's actually really good for the UK, but it would have been better had they made that as a bilateral free trade deal with the UK. It'd be fantastic if we could replicate that opportunity with the Gulf, with Nigeria, Uganda, bits of Southeast Asia. And really to say, if you're going to start a company in the UK, you're not just getting 60, 70 million customers, you're getting a faster on-ramp as a FinTech to access hundreds of millions around the world. And I think that's really the game-changing ambition we need as a country. And that's going to open the doors for then companies like us and many of you in the audience to really go global and deliver on the government's ambition.
Barney, what's your views?
The key to unlocking that door is legal analysis, actually, because it is possible to do that for most FinTechs from the UK and to offer services cross-border without navigating through all these hoops. Because inherently, an awful lot of these businesses are reverse solicitation businesses. And so actually, on a proper analysis, customers can reach out from under the umbrella and restrictions of their domestic systems to get service from here. And that's how we need to start thinking, and that's the sort of innovative lawyering that's required in order to make sure that the doors you're referring to can be opened.
Maha, anything from an opportunity point of view?
Well, I think, I mean, a lot has been spoken about funding, talent, you know, the conditions here. You know, we spoke about the regulatory environment. I think there's huge opportunity for FinTech across, you know, across multiple sides of the economy. I mean, FinTech is fueling a lot more. I mean, it plays a role in infrastructure. We spoke about productivity. We spoke about consumer outcomes, good consumer outcomes, better consumer outcomes. So there's a huge opportunity for us just to get on with what we have while looking at how we can continue to improve, I think. We always look at the future, which is great. You know, we're always looking for that kind of 10-year ahead, what does this look like, 5-year ahead. Sometimes we just need to look up and look around us. There's quite a lot of great things going on that if we get these right, and obviously we're and other regulators, I mean, we're part of the Digital Regulatory Cooperation Forum to really think about some of those cross-sector challenges that you all have. You know, bring those to the table and let's have the conversation. And I think, you know, in the next 12 months, there could be a lot of opportunity. So I'm optimistic.
That's great to hear. So as we look to the future, we've also got to consider our threats and really reflect on the threats that are out there. And one of the ones that we've seen, I guess, over the last few months is the wider economic resilience of the market. And would be really interested to get your reflections, Angelina, on how you think that could threaten the UK FinTech sector.
Well, ultimately, companies in the FinTech sector trading through their first recessionary, unstable economic scenario. So far, we've had a great run for quite a number of years. So majority of businesses in the space have been set up in better times and operating in a growing economy and growing against a very positive economic backdrop. Now we have seen increase in inflation, we've seen a fair amount of instability in capital markets, and as a result, it represents challenges. It put pressure on talent, there's pressure on cost of living, pressure on cost base of the businesses, and then ultimately businesses facing the need to pass the increased costs onto their customers, which is often difficult because we're so used to non-inflation, very low inflationary environment. Therefore, that's a real threat. And in this environment, clearly, funding is a little harder to find. There is a real flight to quality across the venture capitalist community and investors. And therefore, it's going to be more challenging to perform, win new business, price it accordingly, and deliver sustainable business.
So what's important for fintechs in that environment?
I would encourage everybody to focus on their unit economics and actually focus on viability of the product and making sure that you don't burn too much cash in such a challenging environment. Is your pricing right and set to allow you to scale? Are you able to service your customers effectively, efficiently, cost efficiently without burning too much cash? Because ultimately what you should be looking towards, if you're still loss-making, what is your break-even point, i.e. manage your cost base and focus on sales.
Great. Louis, I know you've got some interesting thoughts on threats to the UK fintech sector. Great to hear from you.
I was going to echo really what's just been said, in the sense that there's a lot of models out there that have been tested during a period of quite a good stability and relatively low rates and high liquidity as well. And I think that that's just going to be tested more and more. And having resilience to some element of volatility in your business model is important. Quite often, that has seemed to be to have some diversification of different businesses, that if one is negatively impacted, maybe others are more positively impacted. But quite a lot of startup companies really are very focused. So I think there is a risk around this. So look after your cash and keep driving customer generation, I think, has got to be the mantra. But I think also it's a time where we're going to see whether fintechs can really scale as disruptors, or whether they have to become more conventional in order to deal with the volatile times and be able to get access to funding and maintain customer confidence as well. So, yeah, tricky time.
Thanks. Interesting point, Maha. It would be great to bring you in.
Yeah, I think that resilience generally has to be something that we keep in mind. I mean, and if we see just kind of the recent events and the possible domino effect that that could have had, there's clearly some vulnerabilities that we need to think about and solve for, particularly in cases of shock, of certain events that may sort of disrupt the market. And the individual kind of resilience is what we, risk management. We constantly talk to firms, no matter what stage you're at, think about your risk management, think about your stress testing, think about your financial and operational resilience. And that obviously multiplied means that you'll have a resilient financial sector. But these are the sorts of questions that I think can come out of the recent events of SVB, Credit Suisse, and so on, that we need to start to ask ourselves. And I think that's a really important question to be had. Conversation to be had.
So I'd say the threats are really internal to psychological and internal to the UK, so that they're easily dealt with if we're prepared to deal with them. The first is the psychological one. We need to think big and think on scale, because it's an inherently cross-border reverse solicitation business. So those who regard us as having 60 million people, can we somehow do deals to expand, are thinking about it in the wrong way. The other threat, I think, is not doing it in a subtle enough way, writing our regulations in a subtle enough way. I'm concerned about the consumer duty. It's well-intentioned, but it's an example of too much of a 10,000-foot approach to regulation with insufficient clarity and definition, which has a chilling effect on innovation, and because basically it lacks legal certainty. The good thing is we got a solution to that, which is the killer app of the UK system, which is the common law case law system. So if we actually marry that with this approach, we instantly solve it. And I've got some amendments going through the House of Lords under discussion, which would do just that.
Great, thanks. So we're almost at time. I'd like to just finish on something positive rather than the threats. It'd be great to hear from each of you what you feel positive about the fintech sector over the next 12 months. Angelina, perhaps to start with you.
Well, it could be up for the debate, but I think I how SVB situation was handled in the UK has been fantastic. It's a still good outcome. Outcome for businesses being serviced by SVB, and other countries are struggling. We have a conversation with the German side of the business. We've seen what's happening in the US, but actually the ability of the UK government and financial system to react, and regulator to react quickly and find a solution to a problem, I think it's fantastic, and it fills me with positivity.
Yeah, I agree. It's really impressive.
Yeah.
Adam?
I think I'm most optimistic that FinTech is going to keep having a real positive impact on people's lives. I think there's a lot of pressure in the economy today. I think there's families that are hurting. I think there's businesses that are on the brink of going under. And I think that's actually when the FinTech scene can stand up and do something better and new than has been done before. And so I think actually we're always looking in FinTech, right, for that clear case study of how we've saved, the country billions or helped fix this issue. I think there's going to be more tangible examples of that thanks to all of your hard work in the audience, and just the increased pressure on everyone. And I think the only element of that opportunity, which is a bit of a concern for me, is just the speed of change from technology. Something I often say, but every bank, in our opinion, is a tech company, just a lot of them don't know it yet. I think that's really the challenge, just the pace of change with AI and with digital identity and these other technologies radically disrupting legacy financial institutions. I wouldn't be surprised if we have a few more bumps in the road before we get to a better place.
Barney?
The opportunity is, as I say, in ourselves. It's here. We just need to think in the right way and believe in the system, which is a fantastic system, legal and regulatory system, and get out and craft things that can be sold to people. I'm a very bullish sort of observer as well as participant in the market.
Maha?
Well, we're living in a digital world, and it's going to get even more digital. I think FinTech has brought digital into financial services, and that's it's not going to go away. So I think it's going to fly. There's going to be more of it. So I'm very optimistic about that.
Ready to finish us off.
So agree with all of that. 2 weeks ago, I was up in Manchester, and we held an event along with the City of London. Lord Mayor came up, introducing Northwestern FinTech businesses to London investors. There are 400 FinTechs around the Manchester area. That is a cluster. And I think the network and the scale of the industry gives me optimism that people will share, people will help, people will keep the momentum going, even if it's going to be a slightly bumpy ride for a while.
Great. Well, I hope you all share our optimism. I'd like to pass on my thanks to the panel and look forward to seeing you again soon. Thanks very much.